Welcome everyone to Successful Succession Planning. Today is sponsored by the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. My name is Anna. I'm the Digital Media and Event Strategist here at the California Employers Association. And again, we just want to thank you for joining us live this morning. So before we get into today's training, just a couple details to go over with you, especially if this is your first time joining us. So as you see, your audio is muted for today's presentation, but there are going to be lots of opportunities and invitations to engage during today's training, and we really hope that you do so. If you do have any questions about the content, you can put those into the chat box at any time, and we will do our best to address them as we go. Handouts will be dropped into the chat box shortly, excuse me. So once you see that icon and file name pop up, you can click it and it'll download locally to your drive. I will be watching that chat box the whole time for any questions or for any issues technically. So if you have any problems accessing that PDF, just go ahead and ping me in the chat and I'm more than happy to help you there. As you saw when you logged on, the webinar is being recorded and the team at Ventura County will be reaching out when that is available to you for review. So make sure you're active on their email list. And then last but not least, we will be inviting you to share your feedback at the end of today's training by participating in a very brief survey. It's 5 questions, takes about a minute to a minute and a half to complete. But the feedback that you share with us in those 5 questions, we really do take to heart here at CEA. We share that feedback with our partners over at Ventura County, and we just collectively make sure we are meeting and hopefully exceeding your expectations with trainings like these. And that's also your opportunity to suggest topics that you're interested in that you would like to see offered in the future. So we really hope that you take that invitation at the end of the training today. So again, today's brought to you by our partners over at Ventura County. And today we are so happy to be joined by Rebecca Cortez, who is one of their business solutions specialists, to share more about the resources available to employers like yourself. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Anna. Thank you so much for the introduction. And on behalf of the Workforce Development Board, thank you all for attending this webinar. We are here to provide all sorts of assistance, and we want to emphasize the hotline for employers. So continue to use the hotline, continue to tell others about the hotline. It is a great service for any question, and there are people who know the work and who are there to assist with any sort of question. I will be leaving my information on the chat if you want to get a hold of me and talk a little more on what other services we provide. Please don't hesitate to contact me. And with that being said, back to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca, Cynthia, Colleen, Micah, the entire team behind the scenes, amazing team behind the scenes over at Ventura County for everything that you do, and especially for sponsoring the complimentary hotline and this series of trainings very much. So now I want to introduce our trainer today. We have Jessica Rivera, who is our Vice President of Human Resources, who's leading us today. So you are in wonderful hands, and I'll hand it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Rebecca. Always a pleasure to work with the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County, and we do encourage you, give us a call if you have a human resources issue or question for anything from A to Z, because we have experts ready to help you, and please take advantage of that wonderful resource. And who are we at California Employers Association? We are a human resources services and solutions organization. We support employers throughout the state of California, and even employers outside of California who have a presence here in California. They have employees here. And as you know, for those of you who are in leadership positions, working in California, even as an individual contributor, we have some unique rules and laws and regulations in California. So again, take advantage of the hotline that is sponsored by the Workforce Board of Ventura County, and give us a call when you run into an issue so that you don't have to lose any sleep over those human resources issues. Also, our attorneys make us say that we aren't attorneys, which is true. Although we do have attorneys on our staff, we do not provide legal advice. We provide guidance to you. And many times people will call us and ask us questions and ask us for our recommendations, which will provide you recommendations and options on ways to perhaps handle a situation. And also those things, you know, some of those run-of-the-mill issues that come up, like wage and hour, or some of the more complex issues that might come up when it comes to human relations and employee relations, things of that nature. So we will provide recommendations to you and offer you guidance. And the nice thing is that we have a lot of subject matter experts on our in our company, and they can give you some answers pretty darn quickly when you call us for some advice or just some guidance when you run into a situation. So today we are going to be talking, as you saw at the title, about succession planning and successful succession planning. But before we get into the presentation, I wanted to just do a quick poll and ask all of you if you would take a moment and answer this question for me. And the question is, do you have a succession plan at your company? And you can choose one of these. You have a formal plan. No, we're working on one. No, we don't have a plan, or I'm not sure. So let me bring up a poll. Just want to get a gauge of where we are when it comes to how we're situated today in our organizations when it comes to succession planning. So let's go ahead and launch this. Here we go. If you could answer that for me, it would really be helpful. Good. Okay. Give everyone just another moment or two. Good. All right. Okay, let's see how everyone answered on this. All right, so the good news is we do have one attendee today. They do have a formal succession plan, so congratulations on that. We do have over half of our attendees today saying we don't have a formal one yet, but we're working on it. So hopefully some of the information I'll provide you today will be helpful as you continue to work on your succession planning for your company. And then also we have about almost 40% that don't have one yet. Even if you don't have one yet, this will also give you some insight as you look at your staff and you think about future opportunities for your staff and some of those things that you want to be aware of as you're looking at them for roles of greater responsibility, higher levels of responsibility, and moving even within their career path, whether it's through a leadership path or through a technical path. That this will hopefully give you some good information that you can take with you. So thank you for answering those questions. Let's go ahead and talk about just some of the things, what we're seeing both in today's workplace. You know, what is succession planning? Why do we even do it? What are the benefits of it? And also some steps that you want to be aware of as you're working through making sure all the roles in your organization can be filled. And it truly is just a way to think about, the fact that, gosh, if I lose somebody tomorrow, somebody who has a position that it's going to be hard to fill right away, do I have people on board that I'm setting up for that next role, preparing them for that next role? And succession planning can sound really complex. It really isn't. Sometimes people think, gosh, it's so formal, it's so dignified, it's so complex. It really doesn't have to be. It's really a process to assess the strength of your bench. And if you think about, sports analogy, you want to have a strong bench in the event that a player is injured or goes on leave and can't play on the team. And the process itself does not need to be complex. It needs to be something that you've been thinking about, preparing for, and you just have a plan in place on, gosh, if we lose this key player or that key player, here's how we need to make sure that we take care of our customers, take care of our business, and also take care of our people so we don't have a lot of downtime or people not sure what's going to happen next. So with that in mind, something just to keep in mind as we look at our workplace today with 5 generations in the workplace, and you'll hear the more mature generation, you'll hear them called traditionalists, maturists, or builders. And these are the folks that are in the workplace that are 71 and above. And we still have people in the workplace who are working. And 71 or even 75 is not what 75 used to be. I've worked with a lot of folks who are even into their 80s that are still vibrant, productive, effective, and they still want to work and contribute. So it's not unusual when you think about our more mature generation to have people in the workplace today. Boomers, which was our largest generation at one time, is now, you're seeing a lot of retirements. We have for some time, and they're continuing to shrink in the workplace as they go on to retirement. And hard to believe that even our Generation X, we're starting to see some real movement there too. For those who are on the more senior level of the Generation X, starting to look at retirement also and taking retirement now too. And by the way, that Generation X in the past has been the smallest generation historically, but now we're seeing that our baby boomer is now becoming smaller. And then of course, Generation Y and Generation Z. We've got Generation Y, who's combined with Generation X. You'll sometimes hear them referred to as the millennials, but they are two separate generations. And then our youngest generation in the workplace today is Generation Z, and they're continuing to grow. And by the end of this year, we are hearing that they're going to be about a quarter of our workplace by the end of 2025. And then just for fun, we threw in that next generation that's coming up, which is Generation Alpha, and those are those that are aged 7 and under today. And by the way, Anna mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And if there's a question, Anna will let me know and we can go ahead and answer it for you as we go through the presentation today. And trust me, if you have a question, chances are a few other folks may have that same question. So please don't be shy. And then as we take a look at the size, this is from the US labor supply, the report that we get on a regular basis, but we continue to see the workforce evolving. And even, since COVID, since the pandemic. And what we're finding truly as we look at this is that, again, I mentioned, so I talked about those traditionalists, the maturists, the more senior generation, which is very small, but there still are some in the workplace. Boomers are now down to about 15%, and this is as of August of last year. So it's pretty current on the most research that's been done. Generation X, about 31%, so they're still right around a third. And then also millennials at 36, and then you see Generation Z. And as I mentioned, they're continuing to grow in the workplace, and we will see them at about a quarter of our workplace by the end of this year. And then I do have another question for you before we get into some more information, but I want to ask you, as we think about business continuity and why we want to do succession planning. So as you take a look at some of these reasons for succession planning, which one do you think is the most important of all of these? Choose one that you think encompasses that significance of importance as to why we want to do succession planning. So let me go ahead and bring this poll up for you. Okay, if you could take a moment and answer that. There you go. Good. Good. Okay, give you another few moments here. All right, going once, going twice. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so as you take a look, in actuality, they're all really important. And for some, maybe talent development and retention, maybe because of where we are in our current state at work, that might be the most important when we look at everything else, or strategic workforce planning if you're anticipating a bunch of changes. But overall, succession planning, when we think about how important it is, all of these are absolutely important, because if we don't have the people on board, if we don't have the right people on board, the right talent on board, we're going to be incurring some real issues, having some real issues both with our clients, our customers, risk management, all of those things. And I know as someone who's led many teams over the years, and I'm sure many of you have been part of teams, led teams, all of those things, it's hard. When we lose people, that whole knowledge transfer piece is very, very tough, because it takes a while to get someone that you're hiring new on board to get up to speed and really understand the culture of the company, what we do, why we do it, what's important. So that knowledge transfer is also a big deal. So they're all important, but truly when you look at it at one shot, it's all of these are really important reasons to have succession planning. So thank you. And a couple of things to think about, succession planning is a little bit different than replacement planning. So we know that when we're replacing people, we're finding backups to fill vacancies. As someone who's done a lot of recruiting over the years and someone who's done a lot of recruiting consulting over the years, I've worked with a lot of organizations that are trying to fill, they're growing, they've got new positions available. People are leaving for different reasons. They've got to fill that position so they can service their clients and their customers. Yet succession planning is actually grooming, developing, growing people in your organization so that you can continue to sustain your business results, continue to thrive and grow in today's business environment. And it really gives an organization, a company, that opportunity to look at what the needs are, their current needs and their future business needs, and also taking a step back and reflecting on what's really made them successful to date. What are those skills? What are those attributes? What are those things that we've done over the years to really make us do well and to continue to thrive in a, at times, very challenging business environment? So when we think, replacement, filling roles, growing, whatever it might be, versus succession planning, they truly are two different things, because succession planning does take time as you're developing people for those next levels of responsibility. So why do we even do it? Why is it important? We talked about all of these other things earlier, why there's reasons we want to do it, but there's some true benefits. And the two main beneficiaries of succession planning are obviously the company, yet also the employees, because when we can grow people from within our organization, it can be so much less expensive, because trying to fill people when we're using staffing agencies, even our own people, if we have an HR department, a hiring manager, that's time, that's resources. Then when you factor in all the other work that goes into hiring, if we haven't groomed someone for a position or developed them for it, it can go up to, a career builder says it can be up to 2 times an employee's salary to hire someone and get them up to speed. When you think about all those costs associated with hiring people and developing them and getting them ready to do the role. It also takes time for staff to learn processes, culture, and customers. So when you're grooming someone, when you're working with someone to get them to that next level, it can take a few years. I worked for an organization at one time, and we had what we called a talent acceleration program. It was called TAP. And that particular program, just to develop people and expose them to different opportunities and experiences, it was about an 18-month program. So it's something that requires, thinking about what your needs are, and then how do I fill those gaps? How do I help people get prepared for that? And how do I also expose them to other people in my company? How do I let them get some visibility so people can see who they are, get to know a little bit about them and what they're able to do? Also, it can protect the business. When you have succession planning, people who are ready to take those roles, or even if you know someone's going to be retiring, when you can have someone step right in who already knows the company, who already understands your mission, your values, your strategy, who people that are your clients or customers, who they know, they trust, when you can have someone step right in, and even if something's unexpected, you plan for it, it can make a world of difference about how your outside stakeholders feel about the company. And it's something you want to talk about on a regular basis. It's not a one and done. It's not just putting together the plan and saying, okay, we'll revisit this again in a year. It's continuing to have conversations about that, because you're going to have people who may be part of a talent acceleration program, and you want to make sure that they're on track, they're on pace. Life happens, things happen, and you want to make sure that, where you thought you were going in that right direction, nothing has happened to change that direction for you. It also offers motivation for high performers. Strong talent wants to be challenged. Our youngest generation in the workforce, they tell us time and time again, we want to be challenged, we want to grow, we want opportunities. And the biggest thing we hear though is, I want to be challenged. I want to keep learning and growing. So for those people in your organization who are those high performers, we want to keep them challenged, engaged, and it makes a big difference in their loyalty to the company. And what's great about this, keeping this conversation going when you're doing performance reviews, evaluations, stay interviews, just regular check-ins, just having a cup of coffee, and you're talking about this with them, it continues to keep them engaged and hopefully also offers you some additional thoughts or resources that might be available to continue to accelerate or grow their talents in the organization. When we look at succession planning steps, these are just some you can take a quick look at. You have handouts of everything I'm talking about. It's called the environmental scan. Just taking a look at the current situation of your business and the future environment of it. What are we expecting? A lot of companies today are looking at artificial intelligence. There's a lot of conversation going on with artificial intelligence right now. Everywhere we turn, we're hearing about it. Everything we sign on to, whether it's Twitter or X, used to be Twitter, or whether it's Facebook or Google, whatever we go into, we're seeing opportunities for artificial intelligence to use it, in addition to all the applications and programs that are already out there. We also want to identify those critical positions within your organization. I know when I was doing a lot of the recruiting consulting, there were some positions in the engineering field that were becoming really tough to fill. And if you happen to have people who have those positions, one comes to mind is a land surveyor. And a couple of engineering companies were having a really tough time finding someone to fill that slot. And that was a critical position in their organization. And in one situation, we had to decide we're going to have to get someone right out of college and just grow them into that role because we couldn't find any experienced ones that were available and willing to lead their companies. So if you have those types of critical positions and geez, it's going to be tough to fill it. It's scarce to find these people out there. We need to be thinking about that. How are we going to do that? What can we do to be prepared for the future? Also, what's the organization going to look like in the future? What are our customers going to need? And looking at that transition planning timeline, knowing what we know and planning as much as we can in a world that we know can change on a dime, but just being able to be ahead of it as much as we can. Looking at those competencies for your organization. And it's interesting because you think sometimes about competencies and what people need to bring to that role. And we'll talk in more detail about that shortly, but really looking at what is it for your organization. So for some organizations, it may be really heavy technical pieces that we need to have. In other organizations, I'm going to need people who really have that ability to do some great work around human relations, around employee engagement, those types of things. So it can be both, it can be either or, but what are those key competencies needed to have people in your organizations to drive that success of your organization for that work? And then looking at your internal talent. And a big piece of this is sometimes we don't take enough time to get a sense of what are those strengths that our folks have? What do they really bring to the table? What do they want to do in the future? For those of you who are familiar with Clifton Strengths or Gallup's work around Strengths Finders and employee engagement, so much work has been done around understanding what people's innate talents are, what they're born with, those natural talents, what they're wired to do, and why in some cases people are so good at some of the things that they do because it's natural. So identifying those, taking a look when you're talking with your folks during reviews, what are those things you love to do? What are those things not so much? But being able to position your folks in places where they can truly play to their talents and strengths, because they eventually become their superpowers and no one does it better than them. So if we can put people in those positions, it makes a world of difference. Also developing the action plans to how to transfer knowledge, how to prepare people for those next roles, and understanding that you're going to have turnover. As a leader of teams over the years, I used to hate when my people resign. I never wanted them to leave, especially my top performers, but it happens, life happens. Significant others, spouses get other jobs in other parts of the country. People have to leave us, or they find they go a different direction. But how do we develop those action plans so we're not left holding the bag and thinking, how are we going to do this? What are we going to have to do, and rushing through that? So being able to take those steps to plan what will happen if you have these issues come up goes a long way, and it saves you a lot of sleepless nights too. So when you think about the environmental scan, we have our inside environment, we also have our outside environment, and we constantly have to be looking at what's changing, what's happening, what's getting modified in our internal and our external environment. You may have a group of folks in your company that are getting near retirement age, or they've told you they're going to retire early. That's an internal thing, or you're finding that we're going to need more of this role than another role. And then again, our external environment, what's happening in our business landscape? What do we need to be aware of and be prepared for? And then scanning that on a regular basis and understanding what's enhancing and what's hindering those areas in your organization, those factors that really make a difference in your organization. And then, of course, simple SWOT analysis, looking at those opportunities and threats too affecting your business. So being able to take a look at that and taking that time to have those conversations in your organization can be so important and prepare you for what may come ahead. I'd rather be prepared than be caught in a situation where I'm trying to rush to take care of things that, gosh, I wish I would have taken the time to do it before. So it gives you a chance to look at the present, look at the future, and anticipate any future factors. And then simply asking these questions when you do this, and something to ask about too, just with your own teams, asking them, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? We have seen a multitude of things in the past 6 months with some of the changes that we've seen in our government leadership. So these are just some things that are being talked about both in California, across the country, but what are those things and how might they impact us from a regulatory standpoint, a legal standpoint? What are those things that are happening in market conditions? And what do we need to be prepared for the next 1 to 5 years? And how do we set ourselves up to continue to thrive versus finding ourselves trying to just survive, which is never a good thing. So there's a suitability model, and this was developed by several folks, Dr. Jacks, Nancy Lee from Requisite Organization, Ken Wright and Associates. So this work, it provides a methodology to really assess someone's capabilities for the requirements of future roles and even their current roles at times. And it helps you also, as you go through this with your folks, really get a sense and clarifying what's going on in their own career. What's happening, what do they want to do? And it really can be applied to any role in an organization as you're looking to develop people or position people for levels of higher responsibility. And as we look at this and as we go through several of these things, each of these 4 elements are necessary. One by themselves is not necessarily sufficient. So it really gives you a holistic view of the person and what needs and what steps you may need to take to get them ready for that next role when it occurs. We're very familiar with what they call the SKI model, and when it comes to succession planning, it's about skills, knowledge, experience, and education. And people often, and what I found over the years too, is we tend to over-focus just on that SKI model to make talent decisions, but that alone is not always the best match for a role. So for example, with some of these, we look at skills. We look at, okay, what are the technical skills? What are the people management skills, which is a big one? And what are those business skills? What are those technical skills? What do they have to have in order to succeed in that role? So the skills are important, yes, absolutely. But what are they, and have we identified them clearly as we look at people who might qualify for that role? Education. This is starting to see a little bit of transition in the workplace today. What education is required for that role? Some roles do require specific levels of education, specific degrees. I talked earlier about that land surveyor role, and I remember that at that time there was a specific set of classes, information and training they had to have in college in order to do this role. And when we finally decided we were going to get a college graduate who had this and grow them into that role, that was really specific to a land surveyor role, and it was critical. You couldn't do one without the other, so that was very critical to have that. And yes, in some roles, education is extremely important. Specific training and education is important. But we're also finding today that some companies are saying, if I have someone who perhaps does not have that education, doesn't have that 4-year degree, yet they do have 5 to 7 to 6 years, 8 years in a role, and they're doing the job and they're doing it well, I'm going to not require that college degree. We're hearing a lot more in the workplace now from employers that experience is more important than that education at this point in time. So something to think in mind too for roles that you're looking for. Also, that experience, it's having that proven track record to carry out the work, to do what's required in that particular role, and being able to do it in a way that demonstrates, I've been there, I've done that, I can take care of those customers, I can take care of those clients, I know how to do this, I've done it for 5 years. That experience goes a very long way. The other thing to think about with experience too is what's transferable. So for example, if I work in a customer-facing role, and I have worked in customer-facing roles for 5 years, and I don't have that degree, and the role I'm applying for at your company is customer-facing, but I have a lot of transferable skills, strong communication skills, strong conflict navigation skills, strong just overall customer service skills. Those are things that you want to take a look at too. When you look even within your own organization, how are these people showing up? And are they able to go to that next level of responsibility? So when you think about the SKI model, it is important. It's not the end all, it is important, but it is a framework that's widely used, and it helps assess both the current performance and future performance, how they might show up. So something to think about here, and also keeping in mind with their experience, what's the depth and breadth of their experience? Because if people have been through several roles and they've handled positions with increasing complexity, that's also really important, and their exposure that they've had to different folks. Some people are very skilled when it comes to in and out of an organization, working with teams. All of these things are important. And again, important, but not the only factor to consider. So here's some additional factors to consider when we look at succession planning. Another one is known as CFC, but it stands for capacity for complexity. And I'm going to go through each one of these individually. Do they have that ability to make those big decisions? Do they have experience with innovation, things of that nature? Also, their temperament, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this too. When it comes to temperament, how do they show up? How do they show up within your organization? How have they shown up in the past? Are they role modeling the behavior you wish to see in the organization? Are they able to navigate conflict? Do they have strong communication skills? What happens when things aren't going really well or they're being pressured? Do they handle that pressure? For all of you who continue to grow in your roles, you know that there are times that things are really tough and it gets stressful. How are we showing up, both as a teammate and also as a leader in our organization? Also, accepting the role requirements, that's also known as ARR. And accepting role requirements is very important too, because any new role has a lot of different responsibilities. And are they going to be able to accept those and do well with those? And then do we have that career navigation plan for people we're thinking about, which is back to how are we growing them? Are we considering everything as we move forward? So let's take a closer look at each of these. So that capacity for complexity, knowing that that work varies in complexity and people's ability to handle it also varies. Sometimes people just don't they don't have that ability to go deep when things get really tough and complex. Sometimes people have to think ahead. Part of being a leader is you've got to be a chess player, right? Thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead and looking at that time horizon that we need to make decisions, to plan for things in the future. The impact our decisions have. How are we considering what that impact is? Sometimes, and we've all experienced this, we've had situations where leaders have made decisions and maybe have not thought them through to the degree that they should have, and the consequences and what happens when those decisions are made. Considering all stakeholders inside your organization, outside your organization. What are the risks ahead of us? What do we have currently? What do we anticipate in the future? And then also, what level of innovation is required moving forward? What's important about this when we think about this capacity for complexity is that people are most happy and productive when they're well suited for their role requirements. When you're in a role where you're truly playing to your strengths and you just know that you can do this and you have the talent to do this and you've been prepared for it. We feel the best about our role. We feel engaged, we feel loyal, we feel committed and loyal to our company. And if the job is too big, for example, when we look at this capacity for complexity, the leader of this person feels they have to come down to a level to do the thinking for the person in that role to cover those gaps, because that job is just too big. The person we put in the job, they're not able to do the job in that way, thinking ahead. The person in the role is asking for more and more resources to solve a lot of challenges. They're not thinking for themselves. They're not taking initiative. They don't know what they don't know when they don't know where to go or ask, and they're really struggling in that role. And they need a lot of help and a lot of hand-holding. And then also that person seems overwhelmed. Many of us have probably been in a job that we weren't quite ready for in our past when we think about our career experience. And when that happens, we can feel overwhelmed. Some of us find ways to be very resourceful, get up to speed quickly, but for others, it can be too much and they don't have that ability to do that. Another way to look at it too is if the job's too small. If I have somebody in a job, they've outgrown the job or they're in the job, but it's just not enough for them, it's important to pay attention to these types of situations. Especially, for example, I might be worried if I have someone in a job that's too small, I'm not really using their potential. It's been said that we really only use about 20% of employees' potential. And imagine if we could use more of that. So how do we get that? That's a whole other conversation. But my point is, if that job is just not enough for them, they might leave. Also, they over-deliver on a project. You may need just this done, but they do this and everything else on top of it. They're over-delivering because that job is just not big enough for them. They're looking for additional assignments or challenges. And it's not uncommon for people who are in a role that may be too small. They're involved in other things outside of work too. So it's really that thought process. If I put someone in this role, is it going to be enough for them? Is it going to be too big for them? But what is their capacity for complexity? If I get a promotion and I go into a role and maybe I feel it's too small for me, but I know it's going to grow in the future, I can work with that. I can see a path along the way with this that I continue to develop my skills, but taking a look at that for your own folks. The most important piece is looking at how have they done with projects you've given them currently. So it's another way to gauge, is this person ready for that next level of responsibility? Or are they ready to even be developed for that next level of responsibility? This is a big one too, as you have conversations around your folks, is their temperament. How are they showing up? How are they showing up in a way that, in the organization now? Because if people can't effectively self-manage their own behaviors, they can really derail their own success, their team's success, a company's success. And if there's any behaviors that they've demonstrated that's strong enough to impair their ability to do that, and it's part of that role requirement, you really have to think about that. Are they ready for that next role? Self-awareness is key. Is it someone who's aware of what their challenges are, what they need to do, how they need to conduct themselves in the good times and in the bad times, and in those really stressful times where we're not sure which direction we're going. Very, very important. And it gives me an opportunity for just a moment to talk about emotional intelligence. And many of you have heard this term, and it's that capacity for recognizing how we're feeling at any given moment in time and how we're managing ourselves. So for example, some of us may be very quick thinkers, very quick. And if I get overly stressed, I'm going to move even quicker, and I may become even more impatient or impatient with others. If I'm aware of my own feelings, and I know that that's something that gets in my way sometimes, I have to self-manage myself. I have to say, hold on a minute, Jessica, step back, slow down, and you're starting to get impatient. Or I may invite people to say, let me know when I do this, because I know I can do this at times. But emotional intelligence isn't about being perfect, but it's about being aware of what I'm feeling at a given point in time and how I'm managing my own behavior towards that. And this is why it's so important, IQ versus EQ. IQ, we're born with our IQ. What we have is what we get at birth, and we may increase a little bit until very early adulthood, but what we get is pretty much what we get for IQ. Yet EQ can be grown. It can continue to be grown throughout our lifetimes. And what's fascinating about this is that people with the highest level of intelligence or IQ, they outperform those with average IQs just 20% of the time. So very high IQ outperform those with average IQ just 20% of the time. Yet people with a very high EQ, they outperform those with high IQs 70% of the time. When we think about that for just a moment, that's pretty fascinating. Because when you look at those leaders that you've worked with, look at those people that you've worked with that you remember fondly, that you think very highly of, those chances are those people that you have worked with who through the good, the bad, and the ugly, they were very consistent. How they addressed something, how they handled the situation. You didn't see 2 or 3 different personalities, depending on what the situation was. You didn't have to worry about the mood of the day. You knew that you could count on them, and they were consistent day in, day out. That's why this is so important. So when you're faced with a situation, you're being challenged, we don't want to get defensive. That helps us to drop IQ points when we get defensive, because that's why we can't think on our feet when we get defensive, because we're in the emotional stage. That's why this is so important. And that's something you want to think about for candidates for you moving forward. Where's their temperament today? And here's another portion of emotional intelligence and why it's so important, because it's not just managing ourselves and making sure that we're showing up in a way that when we look back on it, we're proud of how we handled ourselves or handled that situation or whatever that may be. It's the other side of it too, our social awareness. Social awareness is, am I paying attention to the people I'm working with? Am I paying attention to those who are in front of me, who may be tense, who may be struggling, who may be having a tough time, or maybe getting defensive, or maybe challenging me? Am I paying attention to those cues and clues that they're giving me? And am I behaving in a way that's enhancing the relationship? So for example, if I'm talking with you and I can tell just in talking with you that you're starting to get upset about something, am I pausing for a moment and saying, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Help me understand why you're feeling this way, versus taking offense and getting defensive and then going back and forth with someone. So it's that social awareness on those relationships, because you all know, for those of you who've been in the workplace for a while and you've led projects or teams, things happen and people get tense, and it can get really critical sometimes, where there may be conflict or potential for conflict. How we handle ourselves when we're faced with it is really important as we prepare people for greater levels of responsibility, because the problems and the decisions are going to be bigger and bigger as we move ahead in our organization. So the temperament, EQ, is extraordinarily important when you're looking at candidates in your organization that you want to grow. And here's just some signs of low emotional intelligence at work. So if you're seeing this with some of your folks that you're thinking, gosh, they're really good technically, but I've got to get them shored up on the interpersonal skills. These are some things to look at and to consider when you're assessing your folks and developing your folks. Empathy, not everyone is naturally wired for empathy. That's that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, look at it from their point of view. Yet, for those of us who may not be naturally wired for that, we still have to be aware that I've got to pay attention to why this person I'm speaking with, or why this customer is so upset, or why they're so passionate about this. Being able to pause and take a look at that. These are some other things to consider too. And then lastly on here is repressing emotions. We don't want people to not be able to talk about, gosh, I'm feeling a little frustrated here, or I'm a little uncertain here. We want them to be able to be transparent, because if they're transparent, the people they lead will learn to be transparent too. And it's okay to have transparency in an organization. It's okay to talk about those things. Let's talk about them. Let's get them out in the open so we don't get blindsided. I have found over the years, people who repress emotions, they can only do it for so long. And then if they hold it in for too long, then it comes out in a way they're not proud of. So all of these are signs of low emotional intelligence at work. Now, the third one, just as important as ARR, accepting the role requirements. And why this is so important is because every role, every new role, we know this, we have obligations and we have demands on that role. So we have to have people, when we put them in that role, that their interests, their motivations, they're willing to take on the demands of that role. I've worked with people that I've promoted into leadership positions in the past, or levels of higher responsibility. They were great at their job. They did a good job before they were promoted. Yet when they got to that next level, they found they weren't willing to accept all the demands of that role. They just weren't. And I actually had some people who self-selected out of the roles to go back to what they were doing before, which is okay. Yet we want to make sure that when we're putting people or developing them for roles of greater responsibility, they want it, because it's going to be hard work to get there. It's going to be even harder work when they do get there. And we want to make sure that they want that. Also, are there any reasons why an employee might not be able to do the role, or doesn't value doing the work? Taking that time, if we're finding ourselves in that situation where maybe they only want to do part of it, but not all of it. Some of it may be timing. We all know that, different times in our life, we may have more time to give to our careers than other times. And it's having those conversations with your folks. I may love the idea of taking on a new responsibility, but if I'm a parent and I've got 2 young children at home and I have a spouse who travels a lot, I may not have that ability at this moment in time to devote the time to do it. So it's having those conversations with your folks and letting them know, if we have to hold off for a while, we understand. But people have lives too, and we as leaders want to make sure that we are as transparent as we can be when we have those conversations. And then, of course, there are risks when an employee doesn't accept the role requirements because they're leading a team or they're leading a project. We have to make sure that they're willing to accept those requirements for that role. And giving them experiences and opportunities to do things to show that they can do it, they're willing to do it, goes a long way. And other leaders seeing that too and supporting the work that you're doing to grow them. And so when we think about leadership, we think about the work that comes along with it. It's challenging even in the best of times. It truly is. But when leaders are under pressure and stress, and if they're not developed, or they don't have that right temperament, for example, or that emotional intelligence, they can either over or underreact, and they're not aware. They're not aware of what the damage they're causing. That's why when I talk about the temperament, the emotional intelligence, how important that is, and it's a very important part. So hopefully you see now that it's not just the skills, the education, the experience, but it's also the other pieces of it too that we observe in our organization. And then also, this is important too, when you're having conversations with your folks too, and we find this time and time again, half the time there's a disconnect between what a leader thinks that they're projecting and what they're actually projecting, what the organization sees. So I may think, I'm conducting myself in a way that's professional, I'm calm, I'm confident, I'm doing extraordinary work. Yet what my leader or other leaders are observing is maybe not the same thing. And having that conversation and being able to, this is important too, being able to take feedback from people who are trying to grow you and get you ready for next levels, being open to feedback. And also important for all of us too, to ask for that feedback and say, how am I showing up? I want to make sure, was I fairly calm in that meeting? Or did I come across as impatient? How am I showing up? I'm trying to work on my patience a bit more, but making sure that we work with whoever we're growing for levels of higher responsibility and providing them that feedback. And important to do that feedback as timely as you can. If you wait 2, 3 weeks, 2 months, they'll forget it. They'll forget it even happened or won't remember it. So whatever you can do to keep that disconnect, so there's not, it's less and less and less. There's less space. It's not 50% of the time, maybe it's 10%, but continuing to have those conversations. And then also, what does high potential look like? These are some of the signs of people with high potential. And earlier I talked about those that didn't have high emotional intelligence, but these are some signs, some traits that people with high potential look like. And all of these I know you're very familiar with, but there are some too that here that can really make that difference. And part of it too is that political savvy. People understanding that there's more than just what's in front of us, understanding some of those nuances, both within the organization and outside of the organization. It's also people who aren't afraid to admit a mistake. Everything we do as a leader, we're showing our folks how to conduct themselves. So someone who has that ability to be okay, knowing if the mistake was made, we've learned from it, we move on, we won't let it happen again. But it's someone that has that ability to talk about that and to model that for their employees. And obviously someone who understands the business, financial acumen, growing them into understanding that. So these are some high potential traits for you to consider as you're looking at your folks for levels of higher responsibility. And then when we think about a career success navigation plan, you may all have a template. You may have something you've worked with over the years, something you look at in addition to your performance evaluations, because it's not just a performance rating. We want to make sure that someone can exceeds in their performance review for the job they're doing, but if they let you know that they're not interested in doing anything else, this is all they want to do, we want to make sure that we are considering everything for them. And maybe a leadership role is not their path. We don't want to force anyone into a level of higher responsibility if they don't want it, because it's not going to end well. I've done that before, and I regret some of the choices I've made over the years. We want to set people up for success. So taking a look at the suitability model that I talked about, all those things that we discussed earlier, looking and recording those insights using that model. Gosh, when Anna did that project, she handled it so well, and it was so complex, and she was able to manage every single part of it. Reflecting, recording those insights that you're getting on those areas I talked about. Getting feedback from others. How did Anna show up when she was leading that project? How did she communicate with people? How did she handle when people weren't agreeing with the solution? How did she handle that situation? But also asking people for that feedback and getting that insight so you can continue to close that gap of skills that she might need. Creating that career gap closure plan. And that really is taking a look at what those gaps might be from where you need her to be for that next level to where she is now. And then also reviewing and brainstorming ideas with her too and others, and say, how can we close those gaps even faster? What can we do? And let's do it in a way that she feels good about it, we feel good about it, and we see the results from that can make that difference for her. And then also creating that development plan as you look at those opportunities for growing someone, getting them ready for that position. You may delegate a new project to them. It can be action learning, putting them in those situations where they can actually take some actions, represent the company, represent the team, represent a project so other leaders can see them. giving them training. It can be formal training, it can be informal training. They may be working on their degree if they need a specific degree, or they just want to get it for their own confidence. A lot of people want to just finish that degree for their own confidence. 360 feedback, where you ask people for feedback, people who have worked with her before, worked on her team with her before, leaders who have observed her, giving her job rotation opportunities, putting her in different situations. And one of the things we did, I talked earlier about that talent acceleration process or program. We put people in roles for a period of time to see how they did and to be able to be exposed to different areas of an organization. Coaching can go a long way for folks also as they continue to develop their skills, and having someone they can bounce ideas off of and, create action steps for them to close that gap that I talked about. And then of course, mentoring, because mentoring always goes such a long way with folks, and having people in an organization who mentor those who are less tenured, less experienced, and help them to continue to improve. So with that in mind, we still have 3 minutes left. I know I covered a lot. You have copies of everything, but any questions on anything at all that I asked, feel free to put that in the chat. I'm going to take a really quick look now to see if we have any questions at all. Okay, not seeing any questions. So with that in mind, if you have any, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll keep looking at that. And with that in mind, I'm going to bring Anna back on to take us home. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So I want to, before we get to codes, I just want to direct your attention to the chat. If you have not already opened that up, I did put the link to the next training coming up that is sponsored by Ventura County. It's Lead with Emotional Intelligence, coming up on June 26th. The link, again, is in the chat box for you to pull up and register for. And then, sorry, Jessica, you can advance the slide. Sorry about that. And then if you are joining us for continuing education credits, those are on the screen right now. I will also put them, what is my computer not, there we go, pardon me guys. HRCI code today, 704953, SHRM code 25-P4XAZ. If you need a little guidance on what to do with those codes, if you are eligible for certification or recertification, please just reach out, ceainfo@employers.org. You can also call that Ventura County sponsored complimentary HR hotline that is available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And let's see. Nope, no outstanding questions in the chat. So with that, I want to say thank you, Jessica, for sharing your time and your expertise with today's training today. Again, I do want to, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, please scan that QR code, or once you click out of Zoom, a browser window should pop up and give you the opportunity to opt into that survey. Again, it's only 5 questions, but that's how you are able to share your feedback and suggest topics that you would like to see for trainings in the future. I see Rebecca is back. Did you have any other outstanding things you wanted to share with us, Rebecca? Oh shoot, we lost her audio.
That's okay. I think I read her lips. She said, thank you very much. She had no other questions.
Yes.
We will be
good.
So, well, thank you again, Rebecca, Cynthia, your entire team over there at Ventura County for sponsoring not just this series of webinars, but your entire suite of resources available to employers in your area. So thank you, your team. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you all for joining us live. And we will see you again at the next training on June 26th. Thank you all. Cheers.